Okay, so like I mentioned, we're working on the standard to collect and disseminate best practices around climate migration preparedness, especially at the city and urban level. And we're planning on developing that into a certification program. Why certification? Well, why would we ask cities to sign up for reporting requirements and that kind of thing? Well, I think in this particular case, there's a really good argument to be made for a certification model in particular. So the first thing is there's a need for coordinated action over a long time horizon, right? And so in the interim, it's really hard to build a model around climate migration, exactly when it will happen, how it'll happen, are there thresholds at which there's like an exponential effect. But in the long term, we know that this idea of the human climate niche is shifting forward by several hundred miles, right? And we believe also that society will probably rearrange to some extent to reflect that. And because of this really long planning horizon, we really need coordinated action over that time scale in a consistent way. The other thing is, I was working with David actually last summer on this research project around how cities can prepare for climate migration. And I went through a bunch of these climate resilience strategies that cities had, and it was really obvious that the idea of climate resilience, it's out there, right? It started with mitigation, then adaptation, everyone created these plans, that's great. The idea of planning around migration as an aspect of that resilience, it's not in the water, right? And so we want to leverage the mechanism of friendly intercity competition to help get that idea out there, right? So that's another reason that I think city certification is especially important here. The other thing is certification models exist already, some of them around adaptation, but they don't factor in some of the most important information I think individuals and businesses are looking to get, which is where should I move with exposure in mind in particular, right? So other certifications can theoretically apply anywhere if you meet the right policy thresholds. And what we're saying is there is the right combination of exposure and adaptive capacity that need to be taken into account in order to be useful for people. And that brings me to my last reason here for city certification. It's really hard to make climate-informed decisions, right? So let's say people are beginning to wake up and realize I need to consider climate change in how I invest, where I decide to build a life, where I want to raise kids, and this kind of thing, right? That's a healthy thing for society. As soon as you say, I'm on board with this project, it becomes really hard really quickly to do that in a credible way. There's a million interconnected factors, right? You have to take into account fiscal sustainability at the city level. You almost need the city as a partner, right? And so for all these reasons, I think certification is a particularly potent model here. And so I want to return to the standard for a second and how we conceptualize vulnerability. So as individuals begin to get into this debate and this conversation around how do we make decisions about where do we want to invest in the age of climate change, that's really a conversation about how we conceive of vulnerability. And that's what I really want to dive into today, how we construct the idea of vulnerability and what that construction might leave out. So, one second. Okay, so gonna go to the next slide here. Okay, so gonna start to dive into the group work portion of this. 3 is actually, I think, perfect. So we're gonna get this big piece of paper and one of these markers. And if someone could draw these 3 concentric circles. There we go. And then in these 3 circles, we're going to label the inner circle needs, likes, and wants. So the needs circle, we're going to be thinking about how does your city support you, your current city where you currently live. And on your sticky notes, you want to write needs, put them in the needs circle, likes, and wants. So when we're talking about needs, these are things that you like absolutely baseline must have in order to survive in your city, right? How does your city provide jobs, housing, potential education, things like that? It's also about what makes a place livable. And I really want you guys to think about this. What resources does your city have that enable your lifestyle, right? Clean air, clean water, maybe the temperature. and things like that. And likes, these are like quality of life elements. You want to think about how you recreate, how your city supports your community, and really the lifestyle that you want to live. And the last thing is a little more aspirational. It's, what are some things that you would like to see in your city and can reasonably expect from your city? Charging stations or energy and things like that. So, I'm going to give you guys, let's see here. 7 minutes. Yes, you can hang this up. And so you're all going to take your own color sticky note and populate your needs, likes, and wants.
I didn't realize this was a door.
Oh, whoa. George Washington. Fancy, huh? Okay, so this part's individual. Just grab your sticky notes and start sticking them up there. I'll start the timer for 7 minutes. Each of these sheets. The pen up in the end. And your own color sticky note. Sure. Okay, so we're thinking about our own individual cities moving forward and how they support our lifestyles. We have a sheet on the board and everyone gets to put sticky notes and one of those take some pictures. Needs are things you absolutely must have for your city to enable your life, likes or lifestyle elements, wants or more aspirations. Okay. 2 minutes.
I'm yellow also, but it's
But
okay.
I
Yeah.
put the it's very old probably, but I can put something like this. We can know that this.
I wonder what's behind the hidden door there, huh?
It's a maze. I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wants is what I would like that doesn't exist. Okay.
Yeah.
I have to do that. So. Want to take up all three?
We have a lot of minutes.
What can I say?
Okay. About 30 seconds. Great. Okay. I should also say, for your sake, Hannah, that this exercise won't make sense unless I give you a little bit of context. It's an exercise around exploring how our construction of vulnerability, how that could and could not be useful for people looking to make climate-informed decisions about where to live, where to invest. Okay, so thanks for sticking with me and getting all those beautiful colors up on the board. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to turn to the sheet here that says exposure, sensitivity, adaptive capacity, and vulnerability on the top. And you're going to really just intuitively rate your city's climate exposure. So exposure is generally what we think of when we think of climate impacts. These are direct impacts from weather-related, climate-related effects. I should also say our exercise today, it requires some normative assumptions to be made. These are just really broad generalizations we're making through this exercise about things like exposure, how sensitive we are to climate impacts. That's okay. We're not trying to make a quantitatively sound, publishable, peer-reviewed paper here. It's more about the insights we can glean from this exercise. So I'm going to have you rate your city's climate exposure on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most exposed across a number of different impacts, and 1 being the least. Okay, and from there, we're going to go ahead and rate also sensitivity and adaptive capacity. So when we think about vulnerability, and we think about if I'm a person that wants to make a climate-informed decision about where to build my life and invest, right? We're thinking about vulnerability, and vulnerability is always a function of these at least 3 different factors here: exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. I have the definitions, here for you. And we're rating all of these factors 1 out of 10, same scale. And give you guys 5 minutes to think through that and do that.
Can you explain a little more of the difference between the two?
Sure. Sensitivity. So sensitivity is how sensitive you are, your population or your city is to the impacts of climate change, right? So exposure might be like you have a high potential of wildfire in your area. Sensitivity is you have a lot of houses that are not hardened for wildfire, right? So you're extra vulnerable.
Right.
Mhm. And if you guys finish early, just let me know. We can move on.
And for all three, low scores better?
Well, not for adaptive capacity. That's a great question. Yeah.
Did you talk about why you're developing a certification system?
I did briefly. Yeah. And yeah, if you want the spiel again, I'm happy to talk to you. Try not to base your scores off of this sheet. The sheet's to be used afterward. Yeah. Next time I run a breakout session, I'm gonna create a playlist, I think. Seems like we need music or something.
What's the right music for it?
Yeah, that is the question right now. I guess it depends on if it's before lunch, you can do something meditative. If it's after, you need something with a higher beat per minute. Yeah. Okay, anyone still working on this? You guys done? Still thinking? Still need a minute? Okay. 2 minutes. Oh, you're good? Okay, cool. Okay, well, so for anyone that's done, you can go ahead and run this equation. You multiply exposure sensitivity and you divide it by your adaptive capacity to get an overall vulnerability score. Okay, so when you're done, you'll end up with something that looks vaguely like this. Oh, man. Okay, were we, everyone good? Oh, okay, great. All right, so, I'm gonna go just one by one. If you can shout out your scores, that'd be great. Hannah, what was your score overall?
Just the overall
Mhm.
7.
7? Oof. 3?
This one got 12.6.
12.6. That's interesting. Okay. And?
I have to mention before that I made the exercise with 2 cities.
Oh, you did both? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
from
Well,
my hometown in Colombia and from DC.
Uh-huh.
So I have 10 and 2.
okay. 10 and 2. All right. So I'm gonna say go with David City. So we're all gonna pick one of these cities. I think score of 3 is right about where I want to be. And so what you're gonna do now is you're gonna assume that all of these traits that you wrote down about your city all apply to one city, and that city it will be David's city with the score of 3. Okay, and then what you're gonna do is add vulnerability score. You're gonna add 3 degrees to that vulnerability score. All right, so we're creating a second city, and that city will have the exact same vulnerability score, but the exposure and parameters will be different. So we're gonna end up with 2 different cities. Does that make sense? Okay, so the first city is gonna be David City with a score of 3. And David, what were your numbers for exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity there?
4 for exposure, 5 for sensitivity, and 6 for adaptive.
Okay, so exposure is gonna be 7 then. And then let's figure out sensitivity and adaptive capacity. Okay, just a second. Is anyone better at math than I am? Figuring out how to get these scores to balance. So we're gonna have 2 cities here, and they're both gonna have the same vulnerability score, which is actually 3, because we're gonna use David City.
Sensitivity and adaptive capacity have to change to still give you a 3.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, so 1 second.
Why don't you just keep the sensitivity the same and then solve for the adaptive capacity? Make it easier.
Oh, I suppose we could do that. Do you know what that would be? Just a second. Okay. It was 3, right, David? Yeah,
Yeah.
3. Okay.